Hey guys, Jason here. Welcome back to the Ultimate Beginner's Guide to Carvico Maker. In this video, you'll dive into vector creation, the second part of our 4-part series on getting started with Carvico Maker. I'll show you how to create and edit vectors, as well as share in some advanced techniques for working with them. You'll also get tips and tricks to help you make the most out of the vector creation tools that are found in the software. By the end of this video, you'll have a strong understanding of how to use Carvico Maker to create stunning vector designs for your next CNC projects. The video will be broken up into chapters in the description below for easy referencing. So let's get started. I'm going to start a new model here. We're going to use a 20 by 20 inch, and I'm going to use the max resolution. When we open our project here, if you didn't see the first video, Introduction to Carvico Maker, this will give you all the information you need to know about how to set up your material. Today's video is all about vectors and vector creation. Most of those tools are found on the left-hand side of the screen, and we're going to go over each one of those. Starting from the top, our first button is our Select button, which is simply to select the vectors that we're going to be working with. Our next button down is our Node Editing button. We're going to get into this more in detail in just a few minutes. We'll also be going over the Transform tool, and I'll show you how that works. The Mirror Objects button simply just takes your vector and makes a mirror of it on the other side of the screen. You probably won't use this one very much. Our next button down is our Grouping tool, and we'll be going over this in depth as well. The next section down is all of our Drawing Vectors section, and the section under that is the Editing Vector section. Starting with the top, we have our Draw Polyline tool. This is how we're going to start with our very first vector. To start a vector, you simply pick where you want it to start, and you can see where that start position is over here with your cursor position. So if there's a specific spot that you're looking for, you can line that up and find that with your cursor position. Click where you want the line to start and click where you want the line to finish. It will continue to draw the next line that will be connected to that existing line unless you press the right mouse button, and that will finish making your vector line. You can tell it where you want to start your starting point. So if there was a specific spot that you wanted this line to start, you could tell it where you want that in inches. Let's say we wanted to start that spot 2 inches by 2 inches, and we press add point and see, and it started that right onto the 2 by 2. If you notice, when we started to create that second line, the second line is trying to make a curved line, and that's because we have the Draw Smooth Polylines button checked. If we uncheck this and we go to draw a line, the line will be straight instead of curved. You can also hold down the left mouse button and draw like a pencil, and this gives you a little more freehand control. We also have an Add Existing Line check mark here, and what this does, if we uncheck this and we start a line starting on our existing line, now notice when I put my mouse over the corner of that line, it turns into this target. That lets you know that you're starting on an endpoint. Without the Add to Existing Line check marked, when I create my next line, and if you'll also notice that when I'm perfectly level, it gives me a circle with a slash through it. It also does that in the vertical position, so you get that for the vertical and the horizontal, and that lets you know that you're drawing a perfectly straight line. So without that Add Existing checkmark clicked, you can see that it created a vector line that did not connect with the original line. Had I had Add to Existing Line and I started and added a line, it would add to the entire line and make that one line. I want to stop for a second and talk about nodes for a minute. This line is made up of 2 nodes. A node is an endpoint of each of your vector lines. You will always have a starting node, and this is where the cut is going to start, or where the router is going to plunge into the wood to start if you're using this as a cutting line. The green node is your start node. We can go into our node editor by pressing our node edit button. You can also press N on the keyboard, and this will bring up your node editor. And with the node editor open, you can see that both of these lines meet in this node in the corner. I'm going to go over the different kinds of nodes. This node in the corner right now is a line node, or a straight node. And that means that the 2 nodes that it connects to form a straight line. We can change this. If we right click this node in the corner and we come to the top, you can see that we have this smooth node option. And it also is S on the keyboard, and it shows you that shortcut right there. And when we press the smooth node option, it turns that corner node into a Bezier curve. Bezier curve, there's two kinds of curves. We have Bezier curves and we have arcs. A Bezier curve is a curve that has these control wings on it. A Bezier is something that you can change the length of how far away from that node the curve takes place and the strength of that curve. Now notice that it does affect the other side because the curve is relative to the point. I can adjust this other side over here and create different shapes. You also can grab these nodes and move them to create other different shapes. And this is an example of a Bezier curve. Now I can make by highlighting this node and this node. If we right click and we click Convert Span to Line, or we press the L button, it will then change those two nodes back to a line while leaving these two nodes as Bezier curves. We can convert that span back to a smooth node. The other type of curve that we have is an arc. I'm first going to turn this into a line, and then I'm going to convert this line back to an arc, which is convert span to arc. You'll notice that the arc made a semicircle with a node in the middle. The difference between arcs and Bezier is a Bezier controlled with the Bezier wing, and each side is controllable, while an arc is only controlled by its middle point. So wherever you move this middle point in and out, it's going to keep both sides of the span the same length. It will only move like this. Whereas the Bezier curves, you can adjust each one of the curves. In machining, Bezier curves have more points, and so the CNC machine takes longer to go from each one of those points, while an arc is a much faster way of cutting something. And so if your design is built with more arcs than Bezier curves, your cuts will go much faster because it doesn't have to stop at each node to continue on. In our node editing, we also have the Maintain Smooth Curve is going to remove that arc button and will maintain the smooth curve between the 2 points. So once you've established your curve, if you wanted to move that point and keep the curve, you could maintain the smooth curve with that. With that unchecked, it gives you back your arc adjustment node. You can adjust it there. I just deleted those and I'm going to start a new line. I'm going to make this a Bezier span. And this time when I click the Maintain Smooth Curve, you can see that the starting point doesn't move around, or it doesn't completely maintain its curve. You can unclick this and get your Bezier curve wing adjusters back out. You also have this check mark to display the virtual midpoint. This can help when you're trying to line things up, or if you want to try to make that semicircle fall in a very specific spot. When you have these two check marks checked, you'll notice that it adds the S and the little plus mark next to your cursor, and that tells you that you have smoothing on, and the little plus tells you that you have add to existing line. Moving down to our next box is our create rectangle box. These next 2 or 3 are all pretty self-explanatory, but we're going to go over them quickly. You can draw a rectangle, or you can set it to square and it'll maintain the aspect ratio. You also can set the size of the box, and you also can invert your corners. If you wanted to invert, let's say we inverted a 1/4 inch and we drew a box, you could see that it rounded those corners off by a 1/4 inch. You also can invert those corners. It will bring them to the inside instead of the outside. You can rotate this box around to a certain degree as well. Go into the circle tool. The circle tool allows you to draw a circle. You just hold the left mouse button down and draw it to the size you want. And you can see over here that you can set this to either the radius or the diameter of the circle and how big it is. This choice underneath here is whether you create this circle automatically with arcs, or if you're creating the circle automatically with Bezier curves. So if you want all of your circles to start off as arcs, You can create them as arcs and they'll be simple arcs. And that's a fast way to create circles with arcs because they're more efficient when machining. However, you do have more control over the Bezier curve, and so you may want to keep that unchecked. Since I have a circle up, I wanted to drop down and show you the arc fit vectors and the spline tool, both which are very powerful tools. If we go into our node editing, I'm going to press N. You notice that this curve was made up of the Bezier is a Bezier curve. Each node has those Bezier wings, and so you can make the adjustments. We can, with this tool here, is change those Beziers to an arc. You have a tolerance. This tolerance is how tightly it's going to follow the current existing circle. And it says it has 4 Beziers. So if we fit arcs, it's going to turn all of those Beziers into arc circles. Now this is a very useful tool if you're going to take your project and you want to make it more efficient. Let's say you have a bunch of circles or curves in your project that are made up of Bezier curves and you want to make them more efficient with arcs. You can use the fit to arc vector tool and it will change that entire vector into arcs wherever it can. And then you also have the spline tool, which is just the opposite, and it will attempt to make everything into Bezier curves. And if we hit that spline tool, you'll notice that it gave us a lot more Bezier curves than were there before. This is also useful if your line is real uneven, if it has wobbles in it. You can straighten them out using the spline vector tool. You can also tell it to ignore straight spans or preserve straight spans. So let's say this design was part circle and had some straight lines in it. You can preserve the lines where it only changes just the curved parts. Our next tool down is our Create Polygon tool and our Create Star tool. Both of these tools basically create a 5-point or polygon. The Star tool has an additional feature where you can make different kinds of stars. The regular Polygon tool just will draw the polygons. Our next tool down is our Create Arcs tool. This is very similar to our Create Circle tool, except it only creates half the circle or an arc, and you can set this up to create the arcs a couple of different ways. The start and end radius, which is this selection, you can have the start and end point on an arc, and you also can start it from the center like this. Again, you can set the radius of those arcs when you create them right here. And you also can set the starting point or the center point for this one. It would be the starting point for this one. Our next tool down is our text tool. This is how you would create any kind of text. I'm going to show you this text tool is pretty simple. You pick your font. This is a preview of what it'll look like. You have your regular text options up top, your script type, the size. You can have that in points, millimeters, or inches. You can scale the letters. You can shear the letters by degrees, which makes them tilt. And you can rotate the letters as well. Characters is for the spacing in between each letter. And the line spacing is if you have multiple lines. Kerning, you can turn this on or off. This automatically keeps the spacing between the characters even. If you select a curve or a vector, you can select that vector and have your text fall on that line. So if I select this vector, and we can make that start on the line, align to curve. You can have it sweep around the curve. You can have it stretch to fit the curve. There's several different options that you have with the text on a curve tool. Next, we're going to get into some vector editing. I'm going to show you how to edit vectors. The next tool down is our Fillet Vector tool. And what this is used for is to cut the corners off of things in different ways. All you have to do is pick the sides of the two vectors that you want to fillet. This is useful like in the square here. I have the fillet radius set to 0.25 inches or a quarter inch. And I just need to click the spots where I want it to fillet. And you can see that it filleted that and made that round. You also have different options. You can do the dog bone. We have the T-bone. You have an external arc, which will create a big loop. Since this is a vector loop, I'm not sure why you would ever use this. It does have that option. However, that does create a vector loop that you can't cut. And the last one is actually pretty useful, extend trim line. What this one is used for is if you're missing this corner. If I go really quick to my node editor, if you want to insert a node, let's say that you need to have a node here. We don't have one. We can insert a node with the I button, or we can click it here. You also can put nodes at the midpoints, and you also can change where your start node is. Those are all node features. We're going to insert a node here, and I'm also going to insert one here by pressing I. In order to cut these two nodes, I can press C or cut the node. If I wanted to delete that node, I could press D or delete the node. I don't want to delete it, but I do want to show you that. We're going to cut this node. And you can see now that I've cut those two nodes, it cut this vector out. This vector is now free floating. I could grab this, and we're in node editing, so it's stretching it. If I were in my selection mode, I could grab this and pull this out. We press delete and we'll delete it. Going back to this fillet vectors tool, we're going to highlight this vector here and this one. And that extend trim line took that line until they met back up, and that recreated that corner. This is a very powerful tool that probably not many people use. Moving down, we have our trim vectors tool. This will allow you to trim a vector, and it automatically tries to trim inside of whatever you're selecting. So if I were to trim here, it would try and take what was inside that polygon. If I were to trim this one, it would take the polygon off of this one. This is a very useful tool when you have overlapping vectors and you want to come clean those up. Uncheck that, and let's uncheck that there, and we'll unclip that there. See, we've already made us a little design where all of these touch. These are all individual. They're not connected. We also have this auto join, and what this will do is if you have some open vectors, let me get rid of some stuff here. Because this was open, you can see that it automatically joined the corner with that circle. And the auto join will attempt to take two open vectors that are overlapping and join them together. Our next tool down is our offset vectors tool. This was a tool that you will use a lot. This is a very powerful tool. Basically, this tool allows you to create a duplicate vector of the one you have selected, and you can make that a certain distance from that vector. So let's say I wanted a 1/2 inch copy that went around the outside of this. I wanted to keep the edges sharp, and I can delete the original vector. I can have it select the results of the offsetting vector. And the next one down is disable interactive offsetting. You can actually click the line itself and pull outwards, get an offsetting vector, and this is the interactive offset. You also can set a particular size, 1/2 inch outward. We press offset, it will offset that vector. You have the option to have it chamfered, or you can keep those radius so that it doesn't make them sharp, and it will radius the corners. Very powerful tool that you will use quite a bit. This one is really good when you're trying to make a lot of different outlines or tracing to cut multiple steps or heights. Our next two tools down, we've already covered the spline vector tool, and we've already covered the arc fit vector tool. The next two tools down are our join vector with a line and close vector with a line. Join and close vectors are similar in that they both perform a function to create a closed vector. We're going to draw a couple of lines, and I'm going to make these two open vectors. Now, once we select both lines, our option to join those two vectors comes up, and we can join those two with a line. We can join them with a curve or a Bezier curve. We can move the endpoints so that they connect that way, and we also can join them with a coincidence node. I'll go over what a coincidence node is and a little bit more about that when we work the vector doctor, so I'll be going over that in just a few minutes. We'll get back to that one. If we press join with a line, it'll join those two vectors with the line. If we join those with the curve, it creates our Bezier curve. And we also can join by moving the ends, and that just moves those two ends towards each other until they meet. Now, once you have those two joined, you can see that we now can close this and make a triangle out of it with the close vector with the line tool. And so if I press that, it'll close that vector where the two open ends are and make them meet. Just like the other tool, I can also close those with a line or with a curve, which gives me the Bezier curve allows me to make the adjustments. And we also can close that by moving the ends, which with a triangle would just make another line. The next two tools down is our vector clipping tool and our slice vector tool. Honestly, you will probably never use these two, although I will show you how they work. The vector clipping tool, I'm going to grab this star like this. If I highlight all these, I have outside selected. You also have the option to trim, delete, or keep. When we trim those vectors on the outside, you can see that it kept everything on the outside of the star and trimmed everything on the inside. If we do it the other way around, it kept everything on the inside of the star and deleted everything on the outside of the star. Now, which one it keeps and which one it deletes has a lot to do with which one you click first. So if I click the star, and then I highlight the outside pieces that go through it, it's going to fall in a different order. You can see that it kept the circle and clipped the star. So depending on which one you pick first or which one is highlighted first, we'll give it priority. And lastly, we have our vector slicing tool. This tool, you just need a slicing vector. You put that vector on whatever you want to slice, and let's use our slicing vector to slice this star in half. So we want to pick the star first and then our slicing vector. Use last selected vector to slice, and we have it on closed vector. So if we slice this is going to cut our star in half, and because we had closed vector, it created a closed line to close that vector. The other way to use this tool, you don't need a slicing vector. You can use a vertical line or a horizontal line depending on which direction you want to slice it, and it gives you a distance in inches, and this is the distance in inches from 0. Our 0 is here and here on the Y and X axis. Use a vertical line 10 inches. If we move our star over to that 10-inch mark, it's going to cut right along that 10-inch line. And so when we press the slice, it will slice along that 10-inch mark. And you can do that vertically or horizontally. Okay guys, that pretty much covers all of the creating of vectors. Now we're going to go over the Vector Doctor and the Bitmap to Vector tool and importing vectors as well. Before we do that, I wanted to show you the vector library really quick. This is a preloaded list of vector graphics that you can import into your project. There's some pretty good stuff in here that you can use for the different seasons. And all you have to do is grab what you want and just pull it in, and it will import that vector for you. You can set the size and height over here. The next tool we're going to go over is our Bitmap to Vector tool. And in order to use this, we need to import a bitmap or a picture. So I'm going to come over here to our bitmap, and I'm going to import a bitmap. Now we opened this up, it was opened in the 3D view. We're going to be working in the 2D view because it's a little easier to see. When we imported this bitmap, it came in with a bunch of colors. So we're going to reduce those down, and we're going to start by using our Bitmap to Vector tool. At the top of this tool is our Reduce Colors button. What this is going to do is it's going to try and combine as many like colors down to 32 colors. It'll always start with 32 colors. So if we press Reduce Colors, it's going to start. The image had 255 colors to start, and it's combined all the light colors and has brought it down to 32 colors. If we cancel this, let's cancel that. You can't really see where all those colors were combined unless you zoomed way in to see that all these colors are made up of different colored pixels. When we hit our Reduce Colors button, it combined a lot of those similar pixel colors. However, you can't really tell visually. When doing the bitmap to vector, it's going to try and create a vector from the pixels in the color. So the more condensed the colors are, the more cleaner your vector lines are going to come out. We're going to try and reduce this down to as few colors as possible. If we start moving this slider down, you can see that the colors are starting to combine. And the further down we go, the more it sticks them together. And if we go all the way down to 2 colors, it will have it in 2 base colors, the blue and the white. For this demonstration, this is kind of what we wanted. So we would press apply, and we're left with 2 colors down here, blue and white. The first top box is your primary color, and your second box is your secondary color. This is represented over here by primary and secondary, and that's the color you're going to pick. So if I click this blue, notice that it changed to blue here. If I click the white, it changes it to white. Now whatever color is in this box is where the vectors are going to be created. It creates those vectors based on pixel. This is the pixel size. Now you can reduce this down to 1 pixel, and the line will follow every single pixel of that white color. You can also try and give the pixel size a larger size. Like say if you gave it 5 pixels, then it would look for every white section that was 5 pixels wide, and then it would use that to draw the line. You also can have it set to try and smooth those lines as it goes around, or you can have it follow the pixels, no smoothing, and just press 0. If we press create vector, it's going to create our vector lines. If we go back to our 3D view and let's go to our material view, you can easily now see those vector lines. You can turn those vector lines on and off with our vector line button. Those vector lines are also on a default vector layer, which you can turn off the visibility with the light bulb on the right hand side. Vectors can be assigned different layers. If you want to separate this design into different parts, let's say we wanted to take this part out, we could right click it and move that vector to a new layer, and now that vector would be on its own layer. And if we turn that light bulb off, it now has that particular vector separated into a new layer, where the default layer is everything else. Now note that whatever layer you have clicked on is the layer you're working in. So if you're clicked on vector layer 2 and you start altering here, it's only going to affect this here. So you have to be aware of what layer you're working in when doing this. That's the only caveat to having different layers. But it's a good way to separate these elements if you only want to work with parts and move something out of your way and then maybe bring it back in a minute. And then once you have this created, you could create, say, a V-carve toolpath or a profile toolpath and cut this out. If we back up some, and I want to back up to where we had the picture. Let's go back to our 2D layer. We're going to go back to where we had it reduced to 32 colors. This time I'm only going to reduce it down to about 5 colors. I'm going to press apply, and this has this bottom shield part that we didn't capture the previous turn. We also have this shadow that each one of these letters had that we also are not going to be able to capture because of the holes that are in those pixels. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to try and capture that. If we were to try to capture that now, let's pick that dark color and we create vectors. And now if we go to our 3D view, you can see that it created all these little tiny vectors where all of those pixels were. And this can give you a lot of work to try and work all of that out. It's easier to condense those colors down and either come back and draw those in manually, or to try and condense them down where it gives you as few graphical errors as possible. Let's delete this and let's go back to our 2D view. And I also wanted to show you that you can combine these colors manually. So these two colors are pretty close together, but let's say that we wanted this lighter color to be the dominant color. You can combine colors together with the combine button. Whatever is primary will take whatever's secondary and combine those two colors together. So right now we have this light colored blue and this sort of darker colored blue. If we press the combine button, it's going to, and you can see it linked them together. We now have everything that was this color is now this color. And we can continue this on by selecting another secondary color, and you can move it to secondary like this and go back to this primary color and link them again. And you can create a whole chain of colors that all match the same. You can also hold control down and right click the color and it will also link it. That's a fast shortcut to do this same process. By holding control down, It can save you a lot of time. You just pick the primary color that you want, hold control, right click, and it will connect those colors together. And this will help you give you a different color base that you can arrange yourself. You can actually do this back when you had 455 colors and break this picture down manually. The bitmap to vector tool just tries to do that automatically for you. It's a very powerful tool. When you create your vectors, right now I have it set to create the boundary line. So when I create my vectors, it creates a boundary around all of those colors. You also could have it create a center line, and you can have a tolerance in pixels. You can have it try to close the loop vectors. And we'll go back. Let's undo this. Go back to our picture. And we have the dark selected again. We're going to create the vectors. And you can see this time that it closed those loop vectors. And it gave it this bubble look. Let's undo that again. This time we're going to disconnected open vectors. And if we create our vectors, you can see that this time, instead of closing those vectors, it took all those pixels and tried to create a vector to the center line of them. You can use this to get different effects. However, you mostly will use the create boundary. Very rarely will you create center line. The Vector Doctor is a very powerful tool that allows you to find and fix vector issues. It also is one of the most aggravating and complicated tools in the program, and a lot of people get really frustrated with this because it's a little hard to understand how it works. When you open this up, if you have all of your vectors selected that you want to check, you can click identify and it will attempt to go in and look for vector issues. And you will get two kinds of problems. You can get these red circles, and then there are green circles. Here's a green circle here. A green circle is a vector intersection. A red circle is a coincidence node. A coincidence node are two nodes that are closer than the tolerance given for the tolerance check. If you have a 0.1 tolerance in your coincidence points, you're going to end up with a lot of vector issues. And that's because the tolerance for these errors is very large. You want to make the tolerance much smaller, 0.001. This will make the tolerances easier for the software to find the major issues. The less tolerance that you give it, the less coincidence nodes that you will have. All these green circles are vector intersections, and these are places where two vectors are crossing each other or are on top of each other. They will need to be fixed before this can be machined. And you would do this with a node editor by moving these lines off of each other or wherever they need to be fixed. So you would go around to each one of these green circles and try and fix the issue. What you're going to find is a lot of times it has to do with two lines on top of each other will create a lot of these vector intersections. So you would just want to delete the second part. That's going to get rid of all those vector intersections. And we could clean this up pretty quickly by going around and just deleting all the extra stuff that doesn't need to be there. And that's how you would clean that up, using the identify, and it'll show you where you have more problems again. And by reducing the amount of coincident tolerance, you won't have near as much coincidence nodes. But if you do have some, there may be issues like this one, where this is both a coincidence node and vector intersection. You can try to get it to automatically fix vector loops, and a vector loop is where two vectors loop over each other, sort of like this shape. You can ask it to fix the problems automatically. If it's a very simple loop like this, it will fix it. If it's a more complicated crossing, it will not. This middle section of the Vector Doctor is also very powerful, and this can help you find different vectors that are open or closed. Like if you wanted to find all of the open vectors in your program, click this button and it will highlight any vectors that were open. This one will highlight all the closed vectors. This one will highlight any duplicates. Now these are duplicates that are identical. It would have to be identical duplicates in order for the program to determine that it was a duplicate. The clockwise and anti-clockwise buttons you probably will never use, but this shows which vectors are running in which direction as far as when they're cut out. These buttons are very, very powerful close vectors, smaller than. What you can do is put a very small size in here and then select close vectors that are smaller than 0.005. And that's all these little tiny vectors that are probably just pixel errors. And you can delete those and get rid of them really fast. You can set this to 0.009 and find many more of those tiny vectors. Just delete them and you've already eliminated a lot of your issues. This is a really fast way to find all those little tiny vectors that you want to try to get rid of. These are vectors that have certain lengths. You can also find them by their lengths as well. The main thing is these tolerances up here. You just want to make sure that you have a small tolerance so that it's not finding things that are not really issues. The best way to see if this is going to carve or if you really need to fix any of these things would to actually be try and run a toolpath. A V-bit carving will usually carve anything that is a closed vector as long as it doesn't have vector intersections. I'm going to delete all of this except the symbol. I'm going to move this over here, and I wanted to show you our next tool, which is the block and rotate copy tool. And this allows you to take any vector and make a bunch of copies of it, and you can make columns and rows. You can set how many columns, how many rows, and what direction that it's going to make the copies, and how much distance in between those copies that it's going to have. And if you just press apply, it will make copies, and you can keep doing that and making as many copies of any vector that you would like. The next button over, paste along a curve, that allows you to create copies of something from a specific spot or a vector. So if I were to create a vector, number of copies 3, paste, and it pasted those 3 stars along that line. Again, whichever one you press first will copy to the other one. So if I press the curve first and the star second and press paste, it will copy the curve. So whichever one you press first will have priority, and whichever one is secondary will be the target. You also can align those to the curve, and it will try aligning the copies to all the different points in your curve. The next thing I wanted to show you guys was how to import a vector. If we come back over here to vectors and we press import, we can select a vector to import. When the file opens, it's going to ask you if this file is in millimeters or inches and which unit to open it up in. It's going to automatically try to rejoin vectors. You can unselect that and leave any open vectors that it may have. And you also can change a tolerance. Again, the lower the tolerance, the closer it's going to follow the original path. When we press OK, it's going to import our SVG. We can resize this. If we press F9, it will center it for us. Once you've imported your SVG, if you want to move it from here, this is where the transform tool is going to come in. We're going to go over the transform tool real quick. All that does is let you resize anything that you have highlighted. So if I were to just highlight the D and I were to press the transform tool, I could just resize that D. Another useful tool is the grouping tool, and what the grouping tool does is takes any highlighted vectors and it groups them together so that they are altered together or as one. To ungroup the vectors, you can right click and press ungroup vectors or ungroup all. This is a good way if you want to work with a particular word or an object and you want to keep that together. I could group this together, and now once these are grouped, I can move them around as one piece. You can always tell the vectors that are grouped together because they'll be this blue color, while ungrouped vectors will be pink in color. That's how you know if it's part of a group or not. The last thing I wanted to show you guys was how to export an SVG, and that's if you want to save your vectors for another project. All you have to do is highlight your vectors, go to Vector and Export, and you can save that as an SVG file. Guys, that's it for this video. If you like this content, please subscribe, hit the like button, and ring the bell. That lets us know we're doing okay. And make sure and catch our next video on 3D modeling and 3D reliefs. Thanks guys, have a good one.